What's up, folks? Casual Dad here, and for the next in our series of Warlord guides for Warhammer combat cards, we are talking about old Stinky himself, Gloguthrox the Foul. One of my favorite models in the Chaos line. I don't even like Death Guard. I don't particularly like Nurgle Marines. I don't love the aesthetic, but there's something about this guy that just speaks to me, and I have one in real life that's painted that I'm very proud of. But coming in as the, I believe, second cheapest of the Chaos Warlords. He's an interesting piece because he does have decent stats right out of the gate. He is rare, so relatively easy to level, and I believe he's one of the starter warlords, but it's been a minute since I was there. Does not have huge hit points or a super high melee attack. He's not one you necessarily want on the board, but he does come in with fear that can get up to max level, so that rank 4 fear, which can give him a lot of staying power on the board. But just to go ahead and say it early on, if you're going to have him be your endgame piece, you may want to consider having your deck not be melee based so that you can build up a really nasty end blow and have him, or a nasty endgame where he can actually do a really hard swing at the end and get the most out of it. That said, the stat isn't really that high where I would necessarily lean on that, and you can probably win the game with bodyguards without him himself. So, just to talk about this, we just talked about the fear. The kind of key piece that defines him, though, is his trait. So this is when a friendly Chaos card is destroyed, the card that destroyed it is infected by Nurgle's Rot and has all of its attack values reduced by 20%. Now, as far as I know, there's no cap to this. So if you're playing against a thin deck that only has a couple Warlords, or only a couple Bodyguards, you can pick the scariest one and just keep feeding it endless cards until that thing barely does any damage anymore. And just watch it kind of flail against a 10-point fear card and just not be able to get through it. So this can be very powerful over time. But of course, the downside is that it does require that your cards die. So it's a little bit tricky to kind of balance out your deck build around this. Coming in at the cheaper point, having fairly basic stats, you can build a lot of different ways with Gloguthrox, but pretty much every way you build should include some level of Taunt and Fearless, which luckily, Chaos is just chock full of really, really cheap Taunt and Fearless cards. So this is the latest deck I've been trying out with him. One of the actually really challenging things about him is you can play him basically any way, and you can play him with any kind of attack type. You can just kind of make your deck chaos-y. Since the majority of the taunt and endless cards are melee based, I tend to do melee decks, so they're not totally useless. They can do a little bit when they go into play. And you can see right here I've got the 3 and the 4 point taunt cards. Those are your starting point for basically any basic chaos deck. You want to make a chaos deck that's chaosy, you want to start with them just because they'll protect your bodyguards, and a lot of abilities do kind of hinge around cards. Well, actually Gloguthrox is the only one that hinges around cards dying, but just having that 3 and 4 point taunt is such an easy slot to fill in chaos decks because chaos does have a lot of higher level cards that'll fill up your other card slots at the higher price point, but this lets you keep a full deck. So I only have the one endless card in here. I may consider changing that out, and this is mostly melee heavy with fear. A thing I really want to be sure to nail here is that Gloguthrox's ability stacks with fear. So if you hit a card with 2, it kills both copies of an endless card, negative 40%, and then you stick a fear card in front of it, that card is not killing anything. The attack stats on that thing will be basically 0, and you can just ignore it for the rest of the game. So having a cheap fear card in there if you really need to gum up the works is great, but then this is a attrition deck that slowly powers down your opponent, but it weakens you as you're doing it. So you do need to make sure you put a couple power pieces in these decks that can really push through and get to your endgame. So right now I'm trying Khanzar the Red, your good old-fashioned Bloodthirster. He is a nasty, nasty piece here. And I got him to the point where he's got a lot of hitting power, plus he also has Death Blow, so he's very good at chucking through and keeping up momentum and giving you a punch through the opposing deck. And I've got him balanced out by another fear card that also has high melee damage, but also has psychic in case I want to mix up the attack types. Zark is a really, really strong piece, and of course it's thematic because Nurgle. So I always enjoy throwing that in there. And then of course I've mixed in our target acquired. There is a cheaper one that I might mix in. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do that just to do it, because there is the advantage of having cheaper cards just because of Gloguthrox's ability. So I've got this guy here. Also is common, which I appreciate when I'm trying to do a deck build, especially with a basic one like Gloguthrox. So far, looking at this deck build, this is a pretty decent one. It's melee focused and only has 1 card that's above rare and is majority commons. So let's see what we've got at 17. 17 gives us a shield, which is a tempting point, or we could do another taunt. Or we could do a Medicae. Let's go ahead with Medicae, just because that can be used either to supercharge your Bloodthirster, beef up your taunts if you need them to survive a little bit longer, or can be used late game to keep Gloguthrox alive while you finish out the game. Other pieces to consider, it doesn't matter what attack type you have, Gloguthrox can be built with basically anything. And Chaos, interestingly, has some really, really good shooting cards, so you could bust out this guy here and base your deck around a really hard-hitting shooting card that keeps everything else kind of flowing and keeps things going. You've also got really good Inspire, which can help kind of supercharge the cards you have in here too. But also one of the strongest ways to run Chaos is with your Greater Demons. So right now I've got the Bloodthirster in there, but the fear-based Chaos Demon, the Keeper of Secrets, is a really good one to throw in there just to combo with Gloguthrox's ability and help kind of deal with power cards. Then, of course, you've also got the Keeper of Secrets, or the Lord of Change. Lord of Change. This one's also really good because you can feed an Endless card to a scary threat. That will then give you a safe place to put your Lord of Change so that the Lord of Change has time to do the work without dying too quickly. So I think I'm going to do one build with this, and then I'm going to rebuild a different deck, just to go ahead and talk through it. I really enjoy Gloguthrox, and several of the most powerful Chaos decks I've ever seen lean around him. Sorry, the puppies are being loud in here. He is one of the most powerful Warlords I've ever seen in terms of Chaos. I think I hit a 3.6k deck once that was just completely absurd. Couldn't be more perfect. I love it. So Tolmaron, of course, relies on buffing his cards, which is good and bad as a Gloguthrox player. It's good because your ability directly counters that, and you can actually counter that a little bit more just because you've got more opportunities to trigger. Well, actually, it's about even, but the percent decrease matches. So Tolmaron adds 20%, you decrease by 20%. This is going to be a little bit challenging here, though, because that's a fairly stout deck with a lot of cards to get through. Good news on that is he already dropped this down, and if he's got a heavy deck that starts with this thing, that means that the majority of the cards in that deck are fairly cheap. So let's see, we're going to go ahead and start here. Now we're going to go ahead and start here. I want to keep my Bloodthirster alive. Don't care about gumming up the middle. And the cheap Medicae also is there as just a kind of a sink. He can do some melee damage, but then also will trigger Gloguthrox's ability when he does eventually go down. So let's see. And this is great. I wanted to see a matchup here because Tolmaron is good, but he can peter out. If you lose your power pieces, then Tolmaron gets kind of neutered, shall we say. This thing still does 86 damage, which is no joke, but, or let's see, base 82, but it's a lot less than it could be doing, and I'm just further weakening it each individual turn, and like the goal, or like I set out to do, my Bloodthirster is over here clearing the deck around it. So I'm kind of keeping his gains at bay, while also keeping some of my power pieces in play too. This will be an easy board clear, and so I can go ahead and throw my Bloodthirster over there to kind of help finish off the dude in here. And this is why we're playing a very melee focused, including the melee taunts, because now I have the opportunity for my cheap little 3-point taunt to actually kill a card. So this should be an easy win, which is fun. Kind of. Yeah, honestly, I don't really like easy wins. It's good to have them once in a while just to kind of keep going, but I enjoy the closer games where you really get to see both decks really go off the chain. That's kind of my favorite place to be. And here again, I have the opportunity to take this guy out and then keep up the momentum. I'm not going to be able to take out the guy on the right, but it's not going to matter because he's held down by fear. Chaos has great fear and poison cards and also some pretty decent shield cards, and all of those combo well with Gloguthrox's ability. So it's kind of a very healthy sandbox to deck build in. And I had every advantage here, so this should, again, be a pretty easy stomping. So we'll see that. That's kind of a melee-centric Gloguthrox. I could mix in another heavier hitter. I could change out my Gordar Bond for the Keeper of Secrets. That's always an option, and then I could change out one of my other kind of higher points costed card for one of the other cheap Endless cards, because there are a lot of Endless cards to choose from. Chaos just rolled out some Cultists to add even more, so that is always an option there. But let's go ahead and take a look at the Psychic version. So first things first, we'll drop him, Gorder Bond, especially if you get him up to this level, is so good. Just to go ahead and highlight that, for 22 points, with his hit points and fear, and the melee he deals, plus he's got the melee debuff, is rarely going to come up, but when it does, it's really going to matter. This guy just there is no Chaos deck where I don't end up reaching for him early. So I tend to have melee-focused Chaos decks, but even if it's not melee-focused, he is very, very good. Yeah, we're going Psyker heavy. And kind of the idea behind this is that Chaos just has really powerful Psykers, and then also mixing in really powerful Chaos cards lets you kind of do constant pressure so that you are putting out the offensive pressure while your ability is putting up the defensive pressure and keeping your cards alive. Another honorable mention I want to be sure to flag is Lucius the Eternal, because he is both a complete tar pit, just with the volume of hit points and then also being endless, but then also has a decent melee attack, so he will trigger... He takes forever to go down, does a bunch of damage, and also will trigger Gloguthrox's ability in-game. So he is a great piece to consider in any deck you're putting together. He is epic, so it can be a little tricky to have him leveled, but it definitely comes up there. Also, because you're reducing incoming damage, regen is more valuable as well, just because it takes even longer to bring down your regen cards, because they're probably going up against things that have reduced in outgoing damage. Let's see, so I got 35 points, we'll go ahead and throw this in there. So this is actually barely changed. The only thing I really did was sub out my Psychic hitter and my melee hitter and kind of swapped them. So I've got now a heavy Psyker instead of the heavy melee hitter, and then have a both ranged and melee piece to kind of fill in. But yeah, you also can think about things like Poison and Death Blow. Both of those add extra utility. Ooh, that was a good time to switch out the melee. I feel like the game is trolling me at this point. It's giving me like the perfect matchups to kind of demonstrate different things about the Warlord here. Let's see what else we got. So we have Taunt. So looking at this, so it's a fairly thick deck. He's got a bunch of cards available. I'm seeing a cheap filler. Okay, so I put down the Endless card because I was concerned I was about to see a big hitter, which I obviously am not. But somewhere in that deck is going to be something real scary, and I'm betting it's one of the Dreadnoughts. And the AI already kind of played at the cheap fillers that would keep that alive, so I'll be in a really good spot for the later turn. And I'm saying that just based on what I'm seeing. I've got a Medicaid that's not healing anything super important. We've got an 8-point melee piece. Those are filler and support cards, and then you've got a decent taunt. So something in there is scary, and I don't know what it is yet. But we'll find out in a minute. So this point in the game is a perfect opportunity to play one of your regen cards, give it a free turn to bump up hit points a little bit before it actually gets into the fight. Now the risk to what I just did, though, is now whatever cards drop, one of them is going to be across from my Lord of Change. There's the Dreadnought, okay, and there's Calgar. That could totally turn around the game, but this is also a really good matchup for Gloguthrox because it is a full deck with a lot of cards, but only 2 of them are really putting in the work. And so I can easily feed those my Taunt and Endless cards, and even if they take down some of my big hitters, it's going to cost them. And here I'm just getting the free regen, so I'm deliberately not attacking with my regen card to make sure it will build up some extra health, and it will attack on defense. All right, got the other taunt, cool. So this should be another fairly easy win, but you can kind of get to see the dynamics of playing these different games, or these different deck styles against each other, and where the Greater Demons fit differently into the deck, but how Greater Demons are kind of central to both. Let's see. I don't think I can kill that. And he's going to hit for 8. Let's see, he's going to be inspired. He's going to die either way, so I might as well clear out this taunt card now. And then even if I trigger that, so that'll do the attack bonus, but then also... And this is where it's tricky, because this is also a bad matchup because, of course, Helbrecht's bonus is applying even as I'm applying the debuff. So it's a buff-debuff situation. So again, you get to see me play against buff decks with a debuff deck. So it's a bit of a wash where the abilities are canceling each other out. but because my ability is not the way I'm planning to win the game, it's just kind of gravy, that gives Gloguthrox an edge in a matchup just like this one. Just because I'm not relying on my ability to do damage where Helbrecht is. Helbrecht really needs to get those kills and build up that attack power. So I'm not necessarily making his cards weaker, I'm just keeping them from getting stronger, which is enough to finish through to the end game. And that's one of the beauties of Gloguthrox here, is where the abilities do cancel out, it's important to note that that buff is how my opponent is winning the game and not how I am. And there you go. I'm not totally sure which deck I could say is better. In that matchup, of course, the Psychic one was a little bit better because the melee one would have been going toe-to-toe, and it would have been taking a lot more damage during the time. So the advantage of the Psychic one is it does let you play a little bit more passive, benefit from your trait, do some damage over time without necessarily taking damage back. But the melee one might have been more fun. But it's going to depend a lot on matchup, right? So you saw the 2-0 with Gloguthrox, kind of see how the game is played, how the ability triggers, some kind of optional deck builds. He is one that will benefit a newer player, but there's a little bit of a problem there, is that, like I said, with Gloguthrox to really succeed, you don't need just his ability, you also need powerful cards that can push through the extra damage and actually be your win condition to actually get through to the end game. And if your cards are all lower level, you'll have the one where you can trigger his ability, but you will struggle with the other where you have the power hitters to kind of actually be offensive as well. So while he is one of the starter warlords and can be fairly strong, you're not going to see him really shine, probably, until you get at least some of your cards higher level. The good thing is it doesn't have to be all of your cards, because you can just put in level 1 or level 2 endless fillers in here, and they'll do just fine for what you need them for, while the cards that you do have leveled kind of fill in the gap. So he does ramp up a little bit faster than some of the warlords that need all of your cards to be higher level, but still you will struggle with him until you hit fairly high level across the board. So there you go, that's Gloguthrox. I do enjoy playing with him, definitely one to try out and see if you really like him, but he is both an attrition and defensive deck, so he can be quite slow. So there's a specific kind of playstyle there that you kind of have to enjoy. But it is fun to see. If you see some enemies, like you've got a 4-card Greyfax deck that's really annoying you and frustrating you, Gloguthrox is the perfect guy to throw in there, because you just feed him a couple endless and taunt cards, and suddenly this card may be very hard to kill, but it's also doing practically no damage back to you, so you have the time to kind of kick it, for lack of a better comparison. So hopefully that's helpful. Good luck with Gloguthrox, and let me know what you think.